Good evening, everyone. My name is Rashid Jamal. I'm your host for GameChange conferences and podcasts. Today we have Habib Syed joining us all the way from States. I'll just give you a little introduction about Habib. Habib Syed is a corporate and securities partner at BJ King Law, PC. Syed heads the ICO and STO working group of the Government Blockchain Association and is an organizer of the Blockchain Technology Law Policy Meetup in DC. He speaks at and organizes blockchain conferences around the world and is very active with startup and blockchain organizations in DC and California. You're also a global mentor for the Korean Innovation Center and a chartered member and an executive committee member of Open, which is Organization of Pakistani Entrepreneurs in North America. You've also served at a variety of blockchain and cryptocurrency players, including exchanges, funds, mining pools, as well as some amazing blockchain and cryptocurrency startups. Well, welcome to the show. Habib, please tell me about yourself. Just a little intro.
Thank you, Rashid. Wonderful to be speaking with you again. It's been some time since we met up in Karachi with that wonderful event you organized. Hopefully we'll be able to reprise that at some point in the future once all this is over. I think you summed up my experience pretty well. I asked you to do so, so I shouldn't be surprised. I'm essentially a corporate and securities attorney. I work with technology startups. And obviously, over the last few years, that's meant working extensively with a lot of blockchain startups where I've sort of found my niche. And hopefully I can provide some insights from my perspective today to your audience.
Sure. Basically, this week we have our topic is blockchain 2020 and beyond. As we discussed earlier, that we're going to keep it on the realistic side, apart from the hype and all the boom we had from 2017 till date. So we have shared a list of topics to discuss today. So I'll start with the 2020 will be the year of blockchain hype fatigue. So please continue from there.
Okay, so I guess the topic is perfect for me. Usually when I speak at conferences and panels, I'm a little bit of the wet blanket. I think that's why people call me in a little bit of a counterpoint. Definitely, I get to work with a lot of great companies doing wonderful things with blockchain. I am not someone who buys into the, worldwide financial revolution, governments being overthrown, central banks becoming defunct view of things. So from that perspective, I'm happy to see where things are going. Obviously maybe a little sad. Things didn't pan out to that grand dream. Maybe they will, who knows? But I do think that while blockchain hype from that perspective may start to die down, where the hype from the perspective of, your traditional blockchain enthusiasts will start to die down in 2020. But what I am seeing more of are really great tech plays, much more mature companies, mature entrepreneurs entering the space, not as many, there's a bad term for it, but not as many coins without substance rolling out. And people really doing a more careful analysis of whether or not they need tokens, of whether or not even blockchain technology works for them. Right.
So would I be correct if I say that the air is cleaning up with all the scammers now? And
I agree. I think that's a perfect way to put it. What's left is sort of the refined metal that might have been at the core of the initial boom, right? And so people like yourself and a lot of wonderful companies that I met out there in Pakistan, a lot of great companies out here, and those are the players that are really sort of sticking with it and are coming up with great applications.
Super. Now, I have a question for you, Habib, in this regards. We've seen blockchain is perhaps the most hyped up technology on the planet so far. I mean, I've seen it with the other technologies too, like when data science and AI and all those buzzwords came around and the big data came around. So with this, the thing is that this technology is got the backup of all of the people as well. Before, previous to that, all these technologies like AI and big data and the data science, the buzzword was there, but at the same time, it was actually on the mainstream, like for the businesses and the corporate market. But this technology is basically it's for everyone. So the hype and the buzzword was even more due to that reason. So what do you think? Is it living up to that hype?
I think it's living up to a lot of the hype. Uh, so I remember going to enough events and hearing enough people talk that really didn't have an understanding of what the technology was, but were very big cryptocurrency enthusiasts, right? People would talk. I went to this one conversation with a fund. I won't name the fund, but one of the senior people at the fund decided to talk about how he thought blockchain tokenizing real estate would allow you to eliminate lawyers, would allow you to eliminate, that one hit close to home, would allow you to eliminate real estate agents, brokers, etc., right, all the way down the line. Now, some of that was true. A lot of it was exaggerated greatly, right? There was a lot of hype about what blockchain could do, and some of that has been burned away, and what we've been left with is maybe a less sexy version, but nevertheless something that is very significant, right? For example, I don't know if blockchain is going to cause our current financial infrastructure to break down, but can it be implemented, or can certain blockchain players replace our current financial infrastructure where you and I are saving, it doesn't sound great, but a few cents per transaction? Definitely. And, that doesn't sound amazing, but when trillions and trillions of dollars are being transacted, is that actually a ridiculous cost saving? Yes. Right. I don't know if the securities marketplace is going to go away as we know it, but will it become drastically more efficient? Absolutely, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think this is the same case with the banks as well. I don't think governments and banks are going to go anywhere anytime soon. We will see more of virtual banks. Actually, the physical banks itself, they'll disappear only. So they need to innovate if they want to exist in the market. Anyways,
exactly.
Continue.
Yeah, and I think to your point, I mean, it's a wonderful example you bring up. To those people that want a little bit more, global banks might not disappear, but it really does, I think blockchain gives the opportunity for other players to enter the scene, where it's been very hard before. Right now, all of a sudden, you don't have to spend hundreds of billions of dollars implementing a large international physical presence. Right? Yeah, you can do this much more simply through a digital bank, and you have new players that have come up because of that. Right? Very quickly, they're not only doing traditional banking services, but they're doing quite a bit more. M-Pesa, just skyrocketed onto the scene. PayPal, Venmo, there's a lot of different things out there that are trying to take the place. I see so many, and this is, I don't know what it is, but trying to tie in the cell phone minutes or cell phone plans and banking, that's one of the most common blockchain startups I come across. And all claim to be very well positioned, and there's a lot of great synergies there. But I think it's interesting that you're seeing this, right? A lot more people willing to try to battle these financial giants, which is very cool in my opinion.
Yeah, indeed. So now we are moving towards more practical solutions, more practical applications of blockchain. What do you see a shift in towards practical blockchain application means shift in or a paradigm shift in our business practices as well?
So I think that it doesn't necessarily have to mean a shift in the paradigm of business practices. Uh, and you asked this question obviously at an interesting time, as you know, we're going through this situation. I've been working from home for the last 2.5 months or so, a little
Mhm.
later than I should have been probably, but you know, we were a little slow here in the States to catch on to what was happening. Uh, the paradigm comes, I think, from a lot of external factors. I think blockchain is well positioned in this case specifically, right? And in other cases to sort of address paradigm shifts that are already occurring. We're already looking as a society to move towards digital payments, right? Um, I think blockchain better enables that for sure. Uh, so I think that's more the way to look at it. Technology is always a tool, right?
Yeah.
Um, Certain technologies might be, you know, groundbreaking enough where they drive insane paradigm shifts. I don't know if I consider blockchain one of them. AI is one of them I'm scared of down the line. But again, one of those that may be overhyped. I guess who knows, you know, until we're here 20 years from now with whatever entity that creates.
We will always have that switch off button when it comes to AI. So I'm not that worried about it at the moment.
I'm not I don't have a technical background, so I'm going to trust people like you to figure that out.
Anyway, so when I say the paradigm shift in the business practices, I'm more talking about the future business models, perhaps, because you see, we all have seen since last more than like 4 or 5 decades that the same business practices and the same corporate culture we have, I think this needs to change quite a lot. I mean, now the products or whatever the solution you have for any company or even any industry, they need to come up with a solution which is actually directly solving the customer's problem, and at the same time giving them better facility and a competitive market to spend their money.
So I think you're right there. Well, you know, one example would just be the services industry we were talking about. Uh,
Yeah.
as the costs come down, as the cost for competitors to enter the space comes down, I completely agree. I think there's going to be, you know, a more consumer centric version of these. Currently, we're kind of stuck a lot of the times with the financial services providers that we have. There's a few options to go through, and maybe you and I are savvy enough to, you know, to try to use some of these more digital options. But still, for, you know, your average, I'll say average U.S. citizen,
Mhm.
um, there's still a lack of options, right? Which means that they can really be strong armed in many cases. I was just watching something the other night uh, about evictions in the U.S., for example, right? I think blockchain technology will democratize finances to a fairly large extent going down into the future. It's difficult for me to see how this will exactly impact um, business practices on a larger scale. When we're talking about payments, though, for example, right, I imagine everything will be much more streamlined. If I'm able to tie my performance as a lawyer to a smart contract, which allows me to get paid in a certain way, I think, you know, that'll be great. So a lot of efficiencies to be created. Uh,
There's
I,
one more area. I'm sorry to interfere,
yeah.
but there is another area where blockchain, especially when it comes to business practice, the within the department or within the company communication, I think that's going to go on blockchain too, because at this moment, what we have, the normal escalation process, whenever you want to escalate something, it takes really a long time. So I think blockchain can solve that as well.
Yes. Okay. So that actually, thank you. I was trying to think through this thing here, but I've actually interviewed a couple of government contractors that are implementing blockchain in this very manner, right? Because I don't know how it is in Karachi. I imagine things are not great here as well. You know, you talk to one person at the IRS, and then you're escalated to the next person, and
Yeah.
then you go lateral, and no one has any idea what you talked about, or very little idea, right? They either wrote it on a notepad or wrote it in some program in their system, but that's not really tied to much, right? They're still, I mean, maybe they're using cloud services, maybe not. Some of the U.S. government is still implementing that. So I do think you're absolutely right. Communication should change. Record keeping should change. These are things I guess I don't think as much about. I sit with my 3-attorney firm over in DC, and we yell over to the next room when we want to talk to each other. But that process of, let's say even signing documents when we send it to clients, to be able to have blockchain that has a more secured and streamlined version of, us sending clients to documents, clients signing off that digital signature rather than coming back to us, allowing, a payment or a transaction to go through automatically it will be great. And, it's something I'm excited to see. It's always a little bit hard to envision how this is all going to work out. And I think we're going to talk about this a little later. But that whole process, the record keeping and communication, tying in with the increased points of connectivity that IoT might bring, the analysis of that data that AI might bring.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Moving on, we have digital ecosystems drive the enterprise need for blockchain. What do you mean by that?
So I think COVID is a wonderful example of this again, right? If we weren't digital, then we obviously wouldn't need blockchain, right? I mean, it would be helpful, but you have like the Hawala banking system that might be okay, right? Sort of the Islamic banking system, I guess you could consider the low-tech precursor here, right? You and I need to generally transact online, right? If I am, let's say, if I find a client that needs your services over in Pakistan, they're going to hire you. It's difficult for us to exchange cash, right? Or send a check via mail. It's just not efficient. There's trust problems, etc. So as we continue to interact more in digital ecosystems, right? Whether there's, and this doesn't just include business platforms, right? It might be even Facebook. We might be talking about Zoom. Actually, I could probably include Facebook here for all those, because I could also pay you through Facebook now. I could do quite a bit.
Libra is already out there in the market,
right? Or we're looking at WeChat. So I think a lot of these things necessitate more efficient forms of transactions, and then different ways of thinking about how we interact. On the side of social media platforms, for example, because my data is out there, I have to think about what different technologies can maybe do the best job. And we'll get into this, I think, in a little bit. What different technologies can do the best job of.
Very big discussion when it comes to social media,
Okay.
especially with the data. The person who owns the data rights, he should be getting the most benefit out of it, I guess.
Right. And well, yeah, well, I think that's one of our next topics, but I have to ask the question of what's going to best protect my data, right? It's a difficult thing then as a user to drive adoption, but that's one case. If I'm sending payments to you overseas, then I have to think about the most efficient way to do that. How much do I want shaved off the top every time? Am I going to pay Bank of America $35 when I want to send you $1,000? from here to there, that seems like an exorbitant fee for a transaction like that. So that's where things like cryptocurrencies come in handy.
The way we see it here, I mean, we see blockchain just like any other technology previously with all the buzzwords. Like when I remember back in 2015, we were working on Hadoop and big data. And what happened with all the buzzword went away. And it's not that Hadoop is gone and we're not using it anymore. It has become part of our internet and the part of our daily life, what we do. So this is the same thing is going to happen with blockchain as well. That's going to have this basic infrastructure. Then everything else like AI and IoT, everything else is going to be on top of it. This is how I see things, but I don't know how things are going to shape up in the future. But there's this question about how AI, IoT, and blockchain, especially after post-COVID time, how it's going to come together and more for the health sector. Especially when it comes to the social distancing and how we must look after each other and ourselves in future. How blockchain, AI, and IoT can work together in this domain, it's remarkable. It's amazing.
I definitely agree. And again, everything these days seems to come back to what this new paradigm is going to be as we come out of COVID. As we perhaps have another pandemic, hopefully not, but 2-3 years down the line, who knows when. And number one, the advent of IoT allows for us to stay connected even when we're not, which I think is great. I don't want to scare people, but for example, having IoT devices from the point of view of an employer within someone's home office can allow for a lot of efficiencies, sometimes maybe a little bit of a big brother feeling other times. Devices within your own body, you're able to give alerts to doctors who are sitting at home, who are able to monitor your blood pressure, your glucose levels, your heart rate, everything, and be able to give you advice from that perspective, right? And then, who knows what we're able to do down the line with operations and treatment, et cetera, using all of this as well. So I think there's a lot of benefits to be had. At the same time, I say all this, I don't know what's going to be happening. We just replaced a lot of people in the logistics pipeline with our example. So there's a need to be aware of how all this is going to change your society, and hopefully,
since we are moving towards automation as well, so you're absolutely right. This is going to happen. This is bound to happen, and a lot of jobs are going to go away. At the same time, it's going to be automated. So when things are going to be automated, you're going to need these three technologies to come together. I guess this is a must.
Definitely, and maybe this comes to your point. Then, okay, so what are people doing as jobs become automated? And if one of our greatest assets is our data, maybe that's another way in which some of these people are then finding a way to live.
Federated blockchains will gain popularity in future. First of all, I was a bit confused because it was a new word for me, federated blockchains. So could you please explain what are those blockchains?
Sure, give me a second. So 1 second. I think the term federated blockchain is something that 3-4 years ago was not even considered a blockchain. I would talk to people and they would say, oh, how is a blockchain if it's not a public blockchain? There's no such thing. I think private blockchain is something that some people are more familiar with, right? And I guess, I didn't know, maybe I'm missing something, but it seems to me like this is the basic technology. And yes, you could have control over it with, less nodes or less decentralization. But at the end of the day, to me, it still seemed like a blockchain, right? I didn't know. But now you have the advent of federated blockchains. And
at least federated blockchains will have less manipulation though. Even though it's private, no one knows what's going to happen inside, but everything will be timestamped. So whatever's there, it's going to be recorded. So at least this is one thing that they need to be careful with.
Right, but I imagine there's also less security at the same time because you know suddenly it's a lot more centralized and a lot more open to attack.
Yeah.
Right. I think it was at your event in Karachi where I had one of the better explanations of blockchain as far as security goes, where you know you can have one large fortress, which would be similar to the cloud, or you can have 20 smaller little castles where your data is stored, and you know if someone has to attack 11 of them to
Yeah.
access the data, then that might be a little bit harder than attacking the one. And all of a sudden, you're decreasing the number of little castles with a federated blockchain in most cases, and so that I think becomes a problem. And the term is still up for some debate, so correct me if I'm going off a little bit, but you can have these blockchains either from governments or from consortiums, right? Or from a single company. And it does sort of hurt the idea, obviously, that there's a public ledger, but at the same time, there's ways to make these auditable. Like you said, information is still time-stamped. Each block is still set in stone and should not be able to be changed. Although I remember, I can't remember, it was E&Y or someone tried to patent a blockchain editor, which I never understood. But I think, that basic concept is still there. So we're kind of taking a step back, and this goes again to the grand vision versus the reality. In these cases, we're kind of taking a step back from the idea of complete openness to having to have trusted parties. And it could be the case that governments will have to step in the case where these are consortiums or private companies, and be able to have some kind of program or some agency that audits the data, right? For example, if you have these financial services companies that are keeping all of this private, there's not much different from today, right? So number one, it's not like we're taking a step backwards from the system that exists today, but at the same time, I guess we can have more faith in the records.
More efficiency, I guess.
Right, and more efficiency. As a government regulator, if I can come in and just audit the data very, very quickly, because everything's there, right? I just need a key to be able to access it, and everything's there. I mean, that's wonderful. And for me, this goes into some less sexy applications of blockchain, like accounting, right? If you are a company that's reporting to the SEC in the US, and your accounting records are stored on a blockchain, and there's another one of those areas where it's great to have. You can see the application of the IoT and the AI, right? For example, you have Macy's. Macy's has a cash register over in, DC somewhere. Cash register takes in a certain amount of transactions. Those transactions are reported to the ledger. AI has to analyze the characteristic of those transactions to determine what kind of revenue stream it goes into. For the accountants out there, how it's characterized, look at whether a refund with respect to that item perhaps occurs down the line, which is another application of blockchain maybe. Then all of that is taken together and using AI compiled into audited financial statements. And then down the line, you have all of this data stored on the blockchain, and it is much easier then for the SEC, when it comes time for Macy's to report, to be able to audit that entire chain of transactions and to be able to get a much better look at Macy's books. That being said, go ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, so you can see the reason then for a federated blockchain in a lot of these situations, because Macy's maybe doesn't want to disclose everything, right? But at the end of the day, we as the public still want enough assurances that what they're reporting is accurate.
Sure. So when you say federated blockchains we are actually talking about the government. So private blockchains, these blockchains, do they have any hope when it comes to the business community? Because we're going to see a lot of private blockchains being used. We know JP Morgan is using it, Zcash. So there's other companies they're going to definitely look into it. So when it comes to the business community, do you think these private blockchains, they have any scope?
Do they have any, sorry, what?
Any potential there?
Oh, yes, definitely. Because I think the business community is not bought in on the public blockchain idea. So whether it's completely private or it is a consortium of companies, I think we're definitely looking at this being the case. And right now there might be more companies that don't have their own blockchain built out, so they're willing to hop on to public platforms. Some companies will not have a reason to build their own private blockchains. But I think that private blockchains are going to be the main mode for many of these companies.
A lot of them in future.
Right. I apologize. I guess I maybe then, went a little bit on a sidetrack there. But then speaking of government blockchains, now from my understanding, China, I think one of the big use cases of this that people were seeing coming was China's digital currency. From my understanding, it's not blockchain based, but I guess who knows at this point.
Especially Chinese, you never know.
Right, exactly. But that is another scary thought, right? So this was something that I would talk about right off the bat, because to me that was the biggest use case of blockchain and the most transformative. Because right now where we engage in some cash transactions, some digital transactions, the digital transactions are often on third-party platforms. Obviously, the government sometimes can get access to those if it seeks it, but it's not a default situation, right? The IRS here that taxes us, they won't know automatically that I was paid $1,000 via PayPal. Certain transactions do have to be reported over a certain amount, but if I get $1,000 from someone, IRS is not going to know. And I should be the one reporting that, right? And if I'm audited, maybe they're going to come get it. Now, in a world in which each of us has a private key, which the government can identify, and there is a digital currency, blockchain or not, but say blockchain for now, that is circulating, and the government is able to track each and every single cent to see where it goes, who pays it, when it's paid, maybe even what location it's paid at. I'm unable to hide anything from them, right? They have all the data in the world on me. And it becomes really important for us as citizens to take an active role in figuring out what those restrictions on the government should then be. I'd say to start with, if all of this is being tracked, there should be no rights to monetize that data on top of everything else, right? I don't want the government to be able to sell my habits because it has access to all of these to Facebook or to someone else who's then going to be able to feed me advertisements based on my very specific likes and dislikes.
Google, have you, as discussed when you were here in Pakistan, the idealistic approach or the best solution for this would be, I'm sure, see, governments, when they start using blockchain, there's no going away that digital identity management, this one domain for the government, that's going to be really efficient. Because if you have all the record of every single person in your country, how much benefit he's taking from the government, and what number of hours or the output he's producing and what he's doing and everything he's doing in the country. If you have those, then you can properly manage in terms of facilitating your citizens. But at the same time, if all the data which is being generated by those citizens, if then that can be monetized, and if government can play a middle part where I have the right of choosing what should I monetize. I mean, it's my right. Yeah? It's my choice that I can choose that what should I monetize. And that way, yes, I would love to give private blockchains to government and let them take control of my life. Yes, fine. Because then at the same time, they're going to look after me too. And they're going to give me enough power of whatever I'm supposed to do with my life that I can actually build things from there. Problem right now is that, first of all, there's no data. Government does not have any track record at this moment. And whatever they have, Nadra, it's one of the most, what you say, that most enhanced technology when you talk about managing your citizens in a country. Nadra is really, really great. If that can be digitized, and if all the digital identities of Pakistani nationals, that can be shift towards a blockchain, I think government can actually, I mean, through reports, through so many insights of big data, what they can do is they can actually find out that how many people, especially in the COVID-19 kind of situation, they can find out how many people need help, how many people are living in rural or in the sensitive areas where they can do so much for their citizens that it's just crazy. And I would love to see that happen, But at the same time, I don't think we trust the government that much at this moment. So how can you bridge that gap?
Right. And that is a very interesting question. I mean, so I'll also say the US has a little bit of a cultural baggage situation here where people are, I guess here Pakistan and the US vibe a lot, right? There's a lot of countries where people are more willing, I think, to give up their personal freedoms for the sake of efficiency. But I think there's enough distrust in both these countries of the government that it comes with a healthy dose of skepticism. Now, from my perspective, I think about laws and different things that are necessary. And actually, I'm interested. I think one useful use case will be, for example, the UAE. So when I was over there in Pakistan, I think you had the CEO of Avanza Innovations.
Yes.
What was his name?
Jawad. I think it was Jawad and Kamran, yeah.
Okay, so they were implementing a lot of the identity management solutions at the time, if I remember correctly, over in the UAE, right? And this was billed as this big push to go paperless by 2021. But you hit the nail on the head. Obviously, there's so much else that goes into that idea of managing someone's identity. There are a lot of efficiencies, and you could sell me on how much easier I'll be able to deal with government, how I'll be able to make payments, how they'll be able to look at the different things I need. So yeah, I'm fine with the government having access to my different transactions, so they know what social services I maybe need, right?
Yeah.
But the monetization is another matter. Now, from a legal perspective, I can think of a lot, right? You already have a lot of protections in the US as to what the federal government can and cannot do. A lot of those are going to have to be fundamentally changed, because I don't think a lot of people imagine the case of a government monetizing its citizens' data previously, right? But like you said, maybe you and I want access to that data. So I think this brings up interesting technological questions as well, right? The laws can be there. From a technological perspective, what can you do to segment parts of that data? So I want maybe the government's not going to back down on being able to get access to the general idea of what went into my accounts, what went out of my accounts, so they know how much I made, so they can tax me, right?
And
And
that's fair enough. No?
right. Well, so now let's look at it from there. Now, if we take that as a base, now does the government want to be able to know that I bought nitroglycerin in one place and a couple of other items at another place, right? So then there's certain things that we have to understand. Okay, the government has a legitimate interest in, perhaps, that we're not going to be able to prevent. Okay, maybe that's fine.
When we talk about government and when we discussing government, if government was not human, then it was a technology or a protocol, I would definitely agree. But since it's not a technology or a protocol, so there's a lot of skepticism when it comes to human beings, and then the government agencies and everything else has been run by humans. So how do you remove that lack of trust? That is the biggest question, but I think it's really hard to solve.
So let's imagine, so let's take this idea of me buying a few different substances, right?
Sure.
Now, maybe I don't want the government to have granular access to the different things I buy, right? Now, perhaps though, and this is where AI comes in, there can be a public, a public algorithm that is analyzing whether or not the different things that I purchase are likely to constitute a certain, a certain substance to create a bomb or something like that. Hopefully, there's no one from the FBI or anyone listening. But then, while the government doesn't get access to the granular data of what I purchase, this AI can perhaps analyze things and then pop that over into another blockchain where the government does get an alert, right? Or another block where the government actually does get an alert. So it doesn't have to have access to everything, but you can have an algorithm, you can have a program that is going through my data, and that program is perhaps publicly available so everyone knows what it is that's looked at, although you have to look at how people might be able to game that, but then the government only gets access to that filtered data at the point where I reach a certain level of threat. And how can we limit that? So I mentioned at a base, yes, I want the government maybe, or the government will definitely want to know what I make, for example, so it can tax me, right, at a base. And then I was saying, maybe the government also wants to know if I buy a few different items that might constitute a dangerous substance, the government might also want to know that. And the question is, how do you balance these things? So from a legal perspective, it's easy to make the laws around it, right? Yes, we don't want government to have granular access to each and everything we purchase, and everything, where it is, when it is, etc. But maybe there are reasons for that to happen. So if, for example, someone murders someone else, A murders B, the government has a right to see, okay, what was A doing an hour leading up to the murder, right? Did they buy a knife? When it comes to me, me maybe making a bomb or something like that, did I buy XYZ that would allow me to do so, right? And so maybe we don't want the government to have access to that. Then you mentioned that, you don't necessarily trust the people part of government. If it was a program or an algorithm or something, that would be different. So maybe one of the ways we can handle it is that, this is where AI comes in, where my purchases are being analyzed by an algorithm that is then relaying to the government whether or not I should be flagged for certain things. And then, in those cases, then perhaps the government can get access to the bottom layer of data, right? And maybe then the algorithm is publicized so that we're all aware of, what it is we're being judged on. This obviously has to be balanced, right? Because you have to create then a foolproof algorithm, because while you want, while you want clarity across the different levels, at the same time, you don't want people to be able to game these algorithms that are then doing our policing for us. So, there's a lot to take into account. And then on the commercialization side, obviously, I don't want the government in any case to be able to sell my data to,
You
consumers.
want Google to sell data?
Right.
Go.
So I want to be able to make money by myself on whatever data that I produce, which is, I think, fair. And then maybe there's ways to have permission private, data that I can lease out to the government or lease out to different companies. And then there's also other issues that come into play then, because then suddenly the government becomes this much larger entity with access to much more information, and everything's basically put into the hands of the government, right? Where you now have this large private sphere, right? Facebook comes up by itself and creates this asset, this data. Well, Facebook and I created together, right? You have LinkedIn, you have Google and other websites that are all creating this data. All of a sudden now the government becomes the biggest player in big data, which is perhaps in and of itself something that we don't want. So it's all.
And to tell you the truth, to start with, I don't think that we're going to see the idealistic approach that what we really want. I think it's going to be, it will take some time. By the time we actually settle things down in a very sane way. In the middle, there's going to be a lot of chaos, a lot of things going to, people are going to be against it and people are going to be in favor of it, and there's going to be a lot of mayhem and a lot of argument. But yeah, this is part of the process. This is part of the evolution, I guess.
I would caution, I think the idea of a federated blockchain coming into place without very careful planning and input from the citizens is dangerous. So, I mean, I think there's always need for tweaking perhaps down the line, but I would be very scared to put anything into place without a lot of careful thought at the front end.
I'm gonna write this point down, because we're gonna discuss this right in the end, because we have a little sort of framework or proposed roadmap for developing countries. So this should be part of it. I think this is very important. Moving on to the next part, which is tougher regulations. Well, this is very much expected that we're going to see that after 2020 and beyond. So what do you say to that?
So regulation is something I think that is needed across the board here. A lot of people argue that blockchain should not be subject to regulation or should not be subject to existing regulations because they're not well suited to the task, because it's something different, right? I get this a lot in terms of securities regulation in the US and abroad, where people think that people should be able to buy cryptocurrencies because they're not subject to the normal, the normal rules. I'll say from my perspective, and again, I'm a lawyer, so maybe I'm a little bit biased towards the system, but I don't consider myself overly so in any case, for what that's worth. Regardless of what people say, I think the fact is that regulation really comes into place from governments, and this requires some leap of faith on our part. For particular reasons, usually to protect its citizens. It's a little idealistic to say, but a lot of regulation, you can trace its roots there, right? Why did securities regulation come into play? I don't know, Rashid, if you've had the chance to watch the movie Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, so perfect example, right? At the end of the day, you want to be able to protect investors. And, a lot of people ask me, why is it that the SEC in the US thinks that people that make under a certain amount of money, have less than a certain amount of assets, usually it's $200,000 and $1 million, are not able to protect themselves, right? And not able to participate in a lot of these private offerings in the same way. And the answer is, yeah, usually, that's true. They are. people with less money are able to take less losses. They have less leisure time on their hands to look at what, you know, has to be looked at. You know, they might have less education, so they're more easily tricked into buying different things. There's a lot of different reasons this all comes into place, right? Now this is true, as true for securities law, as it is for privacy law, as it is for, you know, a lot of different regulatory agencies that come into play. I know in Pakistan, for example, there's been a pretty harsh crackdown on cryptocurrencies, if I'm not mistaken. And some people have come to me, you know, asking questions about why that might be the case. And, you know, again, even in Pakistan, yes, you want to allow for movement of money quickly and efficiently, but at the same time, a lot of countries are in danger of capital flight. And, you know, I think we as citizens have to understand the legitimate concerns that government has, right? On one hand, Pakistanis, you know, we might be complaining about some people taking money from Pakistan and running and buying buildings overseas. You know, we can at the same time try to make it easier for them.
OneCoin is a very good example of it. Sorry to interfere. OneCoin was a very good example for that. You know, I mean, there was people selling OneCoin and promoting OneCoin everywhere in Pakistan a few years back.
Right, right. And then one coin. I mean, that's a whole other disgusting bag to.
I don't know, Habib. I mean, just by looking at Dr. Aruja or the founder or the lead of OneCoin, I could not appetite that. I mean, I could not take it down. I was like, no, man, there's something dodgy, something fishy with that. You know? So
Right.
yeah.
And that's why these laws exist, though, right? I mean, in the U.S. that would be blocked, right? They would be. I mean, they would be subject to a lot of liability. And I don't know what the particular securities laws are in Pakistan, but I'm glad at least, you know, an overall ban was put into place to sort of slow things down. At the same time, then the Pakistani government has to find ways to allow the right amount. And that's something else I guess we can talk about a little later, is how do you find the regulatory systems that make sense in this landscape? I think going forward, blockchain has to understand that it's not special when it comes to these policy concerns, right? All of these policy concerns still apply at the end of the day, and it has to behave accordingly. Some people might find little loopholes here and there in which it can operate, and, you know, that's fine for a little while, but eventually governments are going to crack down as soon as that becomes big enough. I think, you know, for example, there's decentralized exchanges. People talked about how government is going to be able to regulate those, you know, fully decentralized currencies. Who does the government go after? There's a lot of these questions, and government, frankly, has to struggle with these as well, right? How is it going to enforce anything and crack down on exchanges for DEX, right? I mean, these are tough questions in many cases. At the same time, some innovations that blockchain enables, I think, require not necessarily a change in policy, but a lot of times tweaking of the rules, right? So I do think, for example, blockchain allows for more transparency, in which case perhaps certain rules for capital formation should be tweaked a little bit to allow for increased public participation. And, you know, the SEC has already put forth a rule for that, right? The point of companies going public, right, that term is that they're reporting to the SEC, who then reports to the public, right? Now, if you have financials on a blockchain, for example, perhaps it's easier for the SEC to allow a company to raise a little bit more money because everything is visible. And I think, you know, the same thing is true of regulations, you know, within our securities infrastructure. If you look at a more technical perspective, the different role players necessary in the U.S., you have, you know, brokers when you're trading public securities, transfer agents, deposit and trust companies, and certain players within this, you know, in that mid layer can be completely removed, with blockchain. When you're looking at, say, the right to be forgotten with GDPR, there's ways already, I think, in which blockchain makes that work. But at the same time, maybe some of these privacy laws can understand that blockchain is here to help as well from that perspective. And these laws have to be tweaked a little. So definitely regulation, is going to be in place. It's here to stay. It's never going anywhere as long as we have countries and we're not anarchists. In some cases, I think blockchain has to recognize that, yeah, we're going to be subject to these things and we have to operate within them. But there's other areas in which blockchain can drive progress and changes in some of these laws, which I look forward to seeing.
Yeah, definitely. You were asking, you were saying about the regulations in Pakistan. So just to add to that, we have no regulation as such. For it's not actually recognized at all. So if anyone gets scammed, or if I'm a victim of any kind of scam in the blockchain world or in the cryptocurrency world, I can't go to anybody, and they won't be able to help me. That's about it. Nothing. I mean, there's a lot of fear in people that if I go into cryptocurrency, that somebody will come into my house and arrest me. No, I mean, you're not doing anything illegal as such that you will go to jail for that. But at the same time, if you lose something and if you're hit, then no one will help you. That's the policy in Pakistan right now.
Okay, that's So I've heard that a few companies, though, or I hear from a lot of companies that want to operate in Pakistan, that they cannot do so because they're afraid the government will come and shut them down.
So actually, you cannot work. You can buy cryptocurrency, but you cannot have an exchange.
Okay.
There was an exchange in Pakistan, I think a few years back, called Urdu Bit, and
Right.
it was launched by a group of companies called Blockchain Tech, which is headed by Nadeem Hussain, who was the founder of Easy Pesa. There was a whole revolution. So he really believed in that idea. So he came up with all these technologies. But again, I really respect him for that. He's fighting the war again with all the regulators and trying to promote digital currencies in some way or form, which is very good.
And I think that's great. I'll say though, I mean, I don't know how this is always approached, because some people want no regulation, but I think the right way to look at it is to have the right type of regulation, right? Because you want legitimate companies to have a chance, but you do want to be able to prevent some things like OneCoin.
Yeah.
And then I think so. Your next point was social networking, migrating to blockchains.
That's what we were discussing earlier.
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit. I'll say, to the extent we haven't.
Social media and the blockchain technology, how they complement each other.
So I think there's two major ways that I see, right? One is privacy, right? Two is monetization.
Yeah.
Now, I think on the privacy end of things, obviously, you and I have been maybe using Facebook quite a bit, and we use other social networking sites, and this maybe applies across not only social media, but maybe even my email, right, and the internet at large. All of this right now is publicly accessible by those that make the content. Or those that make the platforms, right? They're not publicly accessible, but accessible by those that make the content, and they're able to monetize this thing. There's certain things that I perhaps don't want Facebook to know, right? So I think it's important that people are generally able to control their data. To a certain extent, it is convenient for me when Facebook recommends something that I didn't know I wanted, right? But to a large extent, it gets a little scary, especially as the prospect of me using these platforms for more and more of my life looms, right? We talked about how digital ecosystems make blockchain necessary. And I think that was one aspect of it that I didn't touch on, was not only is it necessary just for efficiency's sake, but also maybe it becomes necessary for the control of data, right? So I definitely understand from that perspective. My hesitance, though, is the idea that you can have the same type and quality of platforms in this um, in this world. So
Mm.
you get a lot of people trying to create decentralized platforms, and frankly, they don't necessarily take off because you're not going to be able to, in my opinion, right? And some people like you can't create as good of a platform and you can't maintain it and upgrade it when it is decentralized in that way, right? So had clients that have even launched their platforms, they've tokenized, and then they've completely decentralized, dissolved the main entity running it, and they've tried to let it fly on its own through an incentivization program, through bounties, etc. And that's fine for like niche users, but if my 10-year-old brother is going to be using a platform, it probably won't be one of those, right? It will be something that's more tailor-made for him, and something that does that. This is not a plug for capitalism, but it almost requires that profit motive and the chance to monetize. So there has to be a balance somewhere there. Yes, I want control of my data, but at the same time, I want these platforms and this content to be made available and for innovation to continue. And I don't think it can at the same level. And you can maybe, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I
And
think
then,
the key would be monetization, as you said. People would tend to see, since we are moving towards automation, so people, a lot of things going to be automated, and a lot of people going to be losing their jobs. So they would need to find avenues where they can generate revenues, and that can only happen when they can actually monetize their data. So they don't mind giving their privacy away, because humans are born this way. We've done it before, and we'll do it again. So we will compromise that the privacy part if we are monetized in some sort of way, that way we don't have to actually be stressed out and look for work and then find avenues to create revenues. If government can solve that, or if companies or social networks can solve that, I don't think that anybody would hesitate. This is my
okay.
personal.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you. And it's just a matter of finding a way to share that revenue, right? You
Absolutely.
can't cut Facebook out of everything, right? If you want them to continue to exist, they have to make their money. It has to be a profitable enterprise if it wants.
But what about those new platforms which are coming up? Like there's this Pakistani guy who's launching Blockstack. You've heard of Blockstack?
Yeah.
What they're trying to do is that they're trying to give the power of data monetization back to its rightful owner. So you can actually launch your startups and launch your ideas on the Blockstack blockchain. And then, I don't know. Do you know anything about it?
Yes, I don't know enough about it though. So I'll say where these, and I know similar platforms like Blockstack, right? I think where they hit a snag for me is how the economics of it work.
Mm.
And that is something that has been like a fantasy world for blockchain, I think, in the past years, because you just had this upward trend of crypto increasing. So you assume people want to mine, and they're okay with taking a hit in other ways because they're getting these tokens that are going to increase in value, ideally, right? Uh, Once that economy starts to break down and things have to sort of be placed in the real world, I don't know what happens. So, for example, you have Ethereum, right? And I need Ether in order to be able to operate on the program. Now, at a certain point in time, what if Ether is the price of Ether is too high, or if it collapses and it just doesn't make sense anymore for me to be running on Ethereum on the Ethereum blockchain? What happens then? If Facebook were to come out with its own coin and to start paying me, I guess a lot of these times I don't see inflation being factored in. I don't see like real market forces being factored into the prices of these tokens that are helping these platforms run. And then, maybe they're able to raise a lot of money through an ICO, but long term, how are they going to stay profitable? What are they going to be able to charge? These questions always run through my mind. And it's something that has to prove itself out over time, from my perspective.
Absolutely. Well, but it's funny that you mentioned that how all these big companies and big names who are already having these platforms like Google, like Facebook, how are they going to be generating revenue in future when you actually take that advertisement and the whole corporate conglomeration from it. One thing is still there. I mean, like, I think Google pays you, or Google pays any company or any idea or any application to have traffic, right? If I can create an app and if I can generate traffic, Google will pay me a lot of money, right? But at the same time, how can I make sure that my data is not leaked or given to Google in that process when the application which is being created, that revenue is going to them? I'm not getting anything out of it. So this is basically a whole trio. It's like a triangle. There's one place where Google who's paying, and then they're buying the data, and then they're selling the data to the data brokers and then in that market. But at the same time, I'm sitting here and I don't know a single bit that what sort of knowledge is being passed on to anyone. There was a very famous case in America that somebody was working in his office working, and he got a call from one of the pharmaceutical companies that they wanted to take his address. Actually, it's funny that they had all the information of what sort of data they were generating from their house, but at the same time, they did not know their address. So that somebody called them up and told them that we have a parcel for you to deliver. And it was a pregnancy bag. So we would like to take your address. So that guy was really surprised, and he said, no, I don't have anybody pregnant in my house. And he was very, very shocked. And he just cut the line. He went home and he spoke to his wife. And after 2 days, they got to know that his daughter, who was about 15 years old, she came to the parents, to him, and the mother, explaining what actually happened, because she was actually searching on Google or for whatever she was searching for. That's how it was picked up. So this is a very, very sensitive issue. I mean, there needs to be a line, needs to be drawn. So if this thing happens in Pakistan, I mean, a lot of lives are in danger.
Yeah.
I mean, so I don't know how they're going to solve this issue when it comes to monetization of data, but there needs to be an end to this. Otherwise, I tell you what, it's so much chaos when it comes to people selling your data or companies selling your data to all these companies. I don't know how it's going to stop. What do you see in countries like States? How people react to that?
So people here, I think people like to be outraged, but at the same time, they will give up a good amount. Like you just mentioned this. We'll give up a good amount of our privacy in exchange for the right to use these services, right? I know that if laws were to have been as restrictive, maybe I wouldn't have access to Facebook and Gmail and the things that I use every day. I have to ask myself the question, are those conveniences worth it for me? And then, I guess the other question is, absent the sacrifices that I made, and the fact sacrifices that everyone makes with regards to, sharing their data with the world, is there an alternative? And I'm all for it if there's an alternative, right? And there's a certain amount of functionality and different things that I'll maybe even sacrifice for that, understanding that innovation is going to be a little bit slower, incentives are going to change. But that is a balancing act, right? Am I willing to completely go without? Probably not, right? I still choose to use Google as opposed to DuckDuckGo. I still choose to use Facebook to stay in touch with people, right? I make these choices every day, and it's not always consciously, but overall it is consciously, right? Overall, I understand that I am sacrificing my privacy, and I'm getting this convenience and entertainment and everything in return.
The next topic is crypto will boom. How do you see that with all the altcoins and so many coins out there in the market? No one's know what's what and what's right, and then so many regulations going to be there in the future. How do you see that happen? How crypto will boom? I don't see that actually.
I hate to just, agree and not offer much on here. A lot of people thought it would have happened a few weeks back, right, with the halving. I'm surprised. So I thought there might be a crash as well, right? Because how the economies of these tokens work is always surprising to me. So you mentioned you people are less trustworthy than algorithms and systems that are put into place. But at the end of the day, even those algorithms and systems are devised by people, and as of yet, they're not self-improving, and I think that is a problem that more and more cryptocurrencies are going to run into. At this point, it really seems to me that a lot of them are still going purely because of people's desire to trade them and their belief that it has value and their desire that it have value in the future. I mean, you have instances like Dogecoin and others where there is absolutely zero value, right? It's something that's created even as a joke, but people trade it. One of the things that comes to mind that I often use as an example is ETC.
Yeah.
The idea that you have the fork, you have a currency that technically goes defunct and is no longer usable for the core purpose for which it was created, but then it's propped up, right? I compare it to when East Germany and West Germany got together. If East German currency was going to be discontinued, it was no longer going to be taken, but someone just decided that East German currency should still be worth something, and people started buying and selling it, even though no one would actually take it at any stores.
This actually absolutely happened with Ethereum and ETC. Yes, this is what happened. And people who actually believed in the concept of ETC, they are still sticking with it.
Right. And that's fine. I don't see it booming at the end of the day, because also the idea that these cryptocurrencies are going to be universally used, that Bitcoin or Tether or whatever XRP are going to be universally used for various purposes and transactions, I think that has to be recognized as a pipe dream. There is a currency that is universally usable, almost, right? And that's the dollar.
Yeah.
So I don't need to have Tether, right, in my wallet. I don't need to have XRP or whatever the case is, BNB. These are all a little bit more trouble to use than they're worth in most instances, and then the use cases for them, I think I think the value will increase to the extent the use cases for them do and the value the networks do, right? Binance has a robust ecosystem of different apps and things you can use, so that's great. Uber, but at the same time, you'll have other companies coming out with their own things, right? You have Facebook with Libra. You have, I have a rotating amount of Uber Cash that's always in my Uber account because I use it so often. So those things are done seamlessly, right? I don't trade them. I don't do different things, but it's just sort of is done because I get a small discount. I think more and more large companies are going to enter the scene, and their cryptocurrencies or internal currencies, whatever you want to call them, they're not going to necessarily be connected to the larger cryptocurrency network, right? They're not going to be listing on exchanges or doing that, because they're just going to be sort of internal coins that they're using for various purposes, maybe for their larger ecosystem. And that will probably, in my opinion, kind of cap cryptocurrencies where they are as far as a market value perspective, right? Not to say that they don't have value and they might not increase and their use cases might increase, but it's not like this 200 billion is going to go to you know, $1 trillion or $2 trillion over the next couple of years. That's my thought on the matter, and then that coupled with regulation, I think will, you know, maybe bring it down or keep it around the same level. At the same time, I remember looking like an idiot too many times to count when it comes to the crypto market. You know, I remember when it was, you know, Bitcoin was at like $1,000, and I thought, okay, every time a regulation would come out, there would be some bad news from China or the US that they're cracking down. And I was like, okay, you know, this is going to hit it. You know, that's my common sense, A equals B understanding, and it would double, you know, no kidding, double 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, and then, you know, 8 to 20 from there. So who knows, right? But that's my analysis at least.
Since we are talking about crypto and its future, recently China has come up with their national currency, or their digital national currency. So, and yuan, it's called yuan or sort of something. But how do you see that? I mean, what I see is that they are actually it's a game of thorns between US and China when it comes to cryptocurrency, because this is the only way China can actually take the power back from in their hands, because at this moment the dollar is it's sort of, if you know, as you were right, that the dollar is being used everywhere, and that's the currency at the moment. So how do you see in future how this plays out? I mean, do you think national currencies will play a big role in future?
Yes, I mean, definitely. I guess I separate those from cryptocurrency as it currently stands. And I don't know how this plays out in the international framework. So with China, it's interesting, right? Yes, they can create a digital currency, but will they be able to rival the dollar is unclear, because there's so much manipulation that goes on of the currency for different purposes, right or wrong. They're doing it for their own country, right? As soon as the currency is, if they want it to be sort of this international standard, then there's going to be a lot of issues with that same type of manipulation, right? I'm not going to want to buy into it if I know China can do, you know, devalue it whenever it wants. There might be this might be where certain digital aspects of it become useful, right? For example, if I know there are certain restrictions on what China can do with the issuance of more currency, with the value, you know, with playing around with the valuations, that would be helpful, right? Programmatic, right? Restrictions that are programmed into the currency itself, into the structure of it. I think that's helpful. At the end of the day, though, I do think that the US dollar is going to have to compete with a lot of other currencies, and that currencies that are digital, or, you know, that do become, I guess, I don't know if cryptocurrency is necessarily the right word, but let's use it for now for digitally banked central currencies. If
it's more of a cashless society.
Digital currency, sorry. I think that aspect of it is going to become necessary, though. In the long term, for me to want to use 5 years from now a currency as the standard, it'll be much easier if it's, you know, able to be used more efficiently. Although, again, we're going to have to factor that in with the privacy concerns and on the discussion of federated blockchains that we had earlier.
Yeah. ICOs, STOs, there's so many IEOs, and now we have IDOs. Could you please shed some light on it? I mean, for a layman to understand, ICOs, everybody understand how ICO wave started and how it happened. But after that, the STOs, IEOs, and IDOs, how far it will go? I mean, where does it end?
I don't know that it ends until until they find something, I guess, that works better. From my perspective, you had ICOs for quite a while and they were doing well, but there's a loss of confidence. So I'll separate STOs from this for a second, right? So you go from ICOs to IEOs, and so there's supposed to be some level of increased trust on the platform, I guess, right? If you can't trust all these different disparate projects that come out, maybe you can trust the exchange, and the exchange has vetted these cryptocurrencies. I think they've almost all universally done very poorly. The IEOs that I've seen, and some of these people that do the IEOs, they're a little bit more picky about which projects they list, right? But then others will list willy-nilly. I'm not going to name any names in this conversation because I work with some, and despite what I think of them, I still work with them. So I think IEOs is let's see how that goes. To the extent the cryptocurrency economy continues, I think there's a need for IEOs to be, if not regulated by governments, there's a need for self-regulation, because the same sort of scam that went on with ICOs goes on with IEOs, right? Except you've just cut in another player. They're just advertising and playing the broker-dealer role, the exchanges. Not to say that they're all scams. IDOs now, it's a whole different thing. The governance on it is a little bit mind-boggling, right? But at the least, what you don't have, so you would like to think suddenly you take out some of the biases, right? With IEOs, there's a lot of motivation for the exchanges who want to get the fees, right? In some cases upfront, or the percentages, whatever, to push these offerings. When it comes to doing this on a decentralized exchange, maybe some of those go away. But I think what you run into is a similar problem with what we were just talking about with Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, right? Where the crowd can be just as blinded or self-interested as anyone else, and the same vulnerabilities are there. I don't see any of these as being a big deal going forward. The interesting thing for me are STOs, right? So let's get to the meat of it.
Please share some insights on STOs and how do you see that happening?
So can you say that first part again?
Would you please share some insights on STOs, and could you please explain for a layman to understand how STOs work?
Sure. So I'll start with a little bit of, I guess, taxonomy here, which is important. There's a couple of different, so STO, security token offerings. Security token can, I think, mean a few different things often. Some people talk about tokens that might be securities, right? So for example, I'm trying to think of something. If, what was it? The DAO, right? That was viewed as a security. So in some cases, it might be a token that has some utility that's also viewed as security. In other cases, it might be assets that are securitized, that are tokenized, right? For example, real estate or fractional interest in real estate. And in still other cases, and I think this is the most common one that people refer to, they are shares, right? Or other more common securities like debts, bonds, whatever the case is, that are tokenized. And this goes back to our conversation about regulation and how blockchain has roles to play in helping the infrastructure, right? Now, I talked about, for example, back in 2015, it was Overstock. Overstock did the first, what I would call an STL, right? Long before anyone else. Overstock has its platform, of course, T0, that a lot of people might be familiar with. That did an issuance of a blockchain-based digital security of Overstock's own stock. And within their offering documents, they talk about how they're going to follow the normal processes of rolling this out. But while they're following it, they laid out why they think that they shouldn't have to, which is very important. So the problem with STOs as of now is that they tend to be more expensive than regular securities offerings, right? I think what's happening there, though, is future proofing. Because of the efficiencies that having a purely digital security takes, and being able to eliminate a lot of the middlemen in securities transactions, I think you create a lot of potential efficiencies in the future that you can't take full advantage of now, because that infrastructure is still getting fully approved, right? You're still trying to get exchanges that are able to fully trade and implement trade security tokens that are fully able to implement blockchain. You have like the NASDAQ trying to implement blockchain into its infrastructure now. On one hand, so you have the top adopting this. Then on another level of it, you have traditional securities role players that are that have spun off, or employees that have left that are creating their own little exchanges for security tokens that they see working. And then below that, then not below, but somewhere on the side, you have your traditional cryptocurrency players that are looking for approvals with different regulatory bodies to trade securities. And this is only on the US side, right? On the side of Japan, for example, you have special laws for these token exchanges, and they're a little bit more permissive. So I think what's going to end up happening in the long run is that a lot of these traditional securities and a lot of the traditional securities infrastructure is going to evolve to accept blockchain. But at the same time, you're going to have a new class of competitors coming up because blockchain enables them to sort of come in and innovate and compete at lower costs, and they're going to be providing alternatives as well. And that's on the side of just the infrastructure. I'll say then you have a whole different topic of, now that I have a security token, what are the unique features of it, right? In addition to the idea that it's going to be able to be traded more efficiently, what can happen? And all of a sudden, and this is not necessarily a feature of blockchain itself, but the mere idea that it's been digitized, the amount of granular control, right? I want to sell my tokens, for example, or my security only to people that graduated from the same college as me, right? Couple that with the appropriate identity management that the relevant exchange has, or some sort of decentralized platform, through which I trade on multiple exchanges has. That's very interesting. And then you have the maybe public ledger aspect of things, where I can get access to all the information I need on the company, right? Where the government can vet all that information for me off the bat. And suddenly it's a much more open playing field here, right? I feel much more comfortable coming in, believing I have the information I need and trading. And then maybe the government feels more secure about allowing me to do so and allowing companies to trade their tokens. Right, that process of going public maybe becomes easier. So it's a very cool, I think future that we see there.
So you are all for token economy and tokenization?
Yes. I say that part I'm fairly excited about is how these security tokens are going to come into play.
Awesome.
There's some interesting legal questions that come in though. So, for example, I've asked whether or not, I had one of my first clients in the blockchain space was actually a blockchain securitization platform, right, or tokenization platform. And there's questions of whether or not basically then we're going back to bearer bonds back in the day, right? And is code law or is law? So if someone holds the token, are they de facto owner of that token? or their underlying shares that the token just represents a contractual, right? That gets into the nerdy part of things that I won't bore the audience with, but it's an exciting field.
It's tokenization and token economy is definitely something that we are looking forward to. That moves us to our last topic and your suggestions to the developing world and the developing countries and the government, how to react to blockchain technology or the cryptocurrency, and what is the roadmap you suggest to our government or all the developing countries, and how would you like to offer your services to them? Please, you have the next 10 seconds, please, the stage is yours.
Sure. So I'll say I think developing economies in Pakistan in particular have a great opportunity to learn from countries like the US that are not necessarily doing it well, but at least have something on that policy level that implements now, right, to blockchain, but then leapfrog, right, in terms of adoption, in terms of everything. Because you're building up these institutions and the regulatory system from the ground up, you can avoid the pitfalls and come up with something that's well adapted to this new world. I would look to regulatory agencies here like FinCEN, right, or FINMA in Switzerland, and the SEC here as well, and look to what they are proposing these days, and try to implement similar solutions in Pakistan that obviously are geared to your particular issues, right? You have to worry about capital flight, for example. Let's make sure we address that. Let's license people that want to issue digital currencies or want to allow trading for digital currencies, and allow this innovation to take place within Pakistan or within the different developing countries, right? And I guess the opportunity is visible in countries like Kenya, right, where M-Pesa suddenly accounts for half of all transactions that are taking place in the country, right? And what a great benefit that brings. I was trying to see if it hit how it hit Kenya's economy, how it hit its currency, but it seems to be adapting well. And I think the more countries get ahead of this, right, because it's going to happen, digital currency is going to revolutionize things. If they can talk about what licenses are needed, what regulatory systems are needed, that not only protect people but also encourage the innovation and make that country, profitable, the better it is, right? And I'm happy to talk to any regulators, any government officials that are looking for advice, feedback on, what are the laws here? What laws do you think we should apply here? Would be excited to work with anyone on this type of thing, because I really think it's helpful.
I see that in your profile as well, that you are already providing your services to the Government Blockchain Association. On what is that? Could you please explain what you've been doing with them?
Sure. The name might be a little misleading. It's not an official group, but an on the ground group that does some lobbying services. So they are sort of a grassroots organization. They have chapters in, I think, 30, 40 countries. And they are basically a group of blockchain enthusiasts, professors, academics, business people, and they get together not only to, promote blockchain, to try to come up with cool new use cases, but also to be able to talk to governments and propose policies. So, once in a while I'll have the opportunity where a government is looking for insight on how it should regulate a certain feature of blockchain, or how it should approach blockchain regulation in general, and we're able to provide a little bit of support there.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. So, say if somebody wants to get in touch with you here in Pakistan, how would they do so? Can they contact us so we can connect them to you?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I mean, I've had the pleasure of knowing you and trusting your judgment, so I will leave it to trustworthy.
Well, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Well, Habib, it was really amazing, and really it was a refresher. Although things are not really possible to have what we really want. I mean, like we will not have a utopia in future, obviously. But at the same time, let's be realistic. blockchain is not going anywhere, but at the same time, it's going to be more realistic, and then it's going to come and play the role of efficiency towards in any domain, whether it's corporate or government, wherever. And when it comes to open blockchains or public blockchains, I think we have good 10 years or more than that, perhaps, to reach that level. I'm not too sure, but I still see that that's where we are heading in future.
Yeah,
Let's a decade from
it's a
now.
matter of patience, though.
Yeah, indeed. I hope things work out that way. I hope we'll be able to have a better monetary system in the world. The, the currency or the usual currency doesn't get printed out of thin air. So something changes. So that's when I say that we don't need the public blockchain. We trust our government enough, and that this would be an ideal situation. So let's keep our fingers crossed and hope for the best. Thanks a lot, Habib, for joining us today, and we look forward to having you again. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Rashid. I appreciate it. Stay safe.
Yeah, and you.